unless there are any questions, I can just get started with the procedure. So big welcome again. So here's a brief overview of what we're going to learn in this training session, or many of you are probably already aware of many of the aspects, but I think we can also take the chance today, if the foundations are already there, to discuss certain things, because CBA is kind of a long-established method. It's been there like since the 70s or so, but it's still very complicated, and especially now in the context of energy systems, net zero emissions, and especially the first principle, there's still many complexities and many things that we can discuss, and especially in terms of practical implementation, because resources obviously are limited. Not only, I mean, resources for carrying out CBA and for carrying out modeling studies are limited, not only at the EU level, but especially also at the regional level. So we also need to find like a pragmatic approach to deal with CBA. And just to tell you, I mean, here in our department at the Fraunhofer Institute, we have many people dealing with modeling, but I see every day that it's very complex exercise. We have very qualified people here who actually know what's going on, but the challenges are always there. And if it's not data challenges, then it's the modeling itself and understanding the energy system, which is constantly changing. So. So let's say that we're trying to cover the basics today of CBA that will help you to either carry out these studies yourself, or to hire professionals, or to hire consultants and to know what to request from them. So we're going to walk through different things. What scope of energy efficiency solutions we should be looking at in the scope of the energy efficiency first principle. What metrics can be used to assess the performance of different technologies, how to find input data, which we comprehensively discussed last week already, but which makes sense to pick up upon here. How CBA relates to energy systems modeling, the role of the societal perspective, which is frequently mentioned in the context of the E1st principle, how to involve stakeholders in this process, what are scenarios and which ones should be considered, wider benefits, multiple impacts, whatever you want to call them. How do we deal with them? Which ones are important, etc. And finally, of course, how the tools of our framework can support you in this CBA process. That's all the groundwork we're trying to cover today. So that's why I think 3 hours in total will make sense. But as I said before, if you have any questions, feel free to speak up, and then we will try to cover as much as possible. So maybe to get started, why do we need cost-benefit analysis at all? First reason is to optimize resource allocation. As you know, the efficiency first principle is much about basically finding the least cost combination of energy efficiency solutions on the one hand and default energy infrastructure, if you will, on the other. And so by having a systematic procedure to compare the costs and benefits of both, we can actually contribute to finding this least cost combination of different technologies and practices. Second reason is assessing the wider impact and sustainability. Traditionally, cost-benefit analysis is mostly about financial metrics like capital costs, fuel costs, operational maintenance costs, etc. But we've seen over the last few years that this topic of wider benefits, wider impacts has become huge. And there are good reasons for that, and especially as we know, when it comes to energy efficiency, the benefits are not just the direct monetary savings, but also the societal, environmental, and economic effects it has. So it's very important to take this into account in CBA to the extent possible. And finally, we have legal and policy requirements that are now or that have been specifically referring to CBA in the context of both energy efficiency and more specifically the energy efficiency first principle. Concerning the last aspect, here's a non-exhaustive overview of how CBA is related to or is referred to in recent EU legislation. Most fundamentally, we've got the official definition of the energy efficiency first principle in the governance regulation, which already hints CBA by referring to cost-efficient energy efficiency measures. So it's not just about finding efficiency measures, but they should be cost efficient or cost minimizing, if you will. Then we've got the new Energy Efficiency Directive from last year in Article 3.1. It says energy efficiency solutions which should be assessed, which is not super specific yet. But in Article 3.5, it refers to cost-benefit analysis, that member states should promote CBA and should promote CBA methodologies. And there's another example on heating and cooling planning in Article 25. Member states shall carry out a cost-benefit analysis. And if you look closer at the annexes, this also refers to the topic of energy efficiency, obviously, but also to multiple benefits, multiple impacts. And you could probably continue this list for long with many other examples in EU legislation. But the bottom line is CBA is basically wanted from the EU's end in many contexts, and there are good reasons for that. It's a powerful tool. Obviously, it has its limitations as well that we're going to talk about as well today. But it's something that helps, let's say, rationalize the process of finding the combination of energy efficiency and energy supply resources that provides the greatest benefits to society, which is not a trivial question at all. So here's our agenda today, which I've briefly shown before. So we're going to walk through the different steps and discuss some particularities. We're also going to have some little quantitative examples here and there to make things more tangible. Finally, as I've mentioned, we're going to look at the limitations of CBA and how this basically relates to the next stage of our framework, which then delves more into multi-criteria analysis, for instance. So we're going to have a look at that, and also CBA in action. We've already introduced the CBA tools before, but I think it's a good occasion today to briefly look at them again, and also to see if there's some practical experiences with them already, if there are any questions, any misunderstandings. Okay. So as we've seen, we've got 7 steps in this stage overall. Step 1 was referred to as assessing the potential of energy efficiency solutions. So in this step, planners should evaluate the potential of energy efficiency solutions. Planners should consider factors such as cost effectiveness, technical feasibility, potential for energy savings, greenhouse gas emissions reductions. So this step is important to incorporate the energy efficiency first principle by ensuring that the maximum or the most reasonable uptake, I would say, of such solutions as planned. So there's a lot going on here already in step 1. So let's just get started step by step, and then we'll figure it out. I think first of all, a very important issue in this discussion around the first principle is what are energy efficiency solutions. The new EED in Article 3 specifically refers to energy efficiency solutions without clearly detailing what qualifies as an energy efficiency solution and what not. Our understanding that we previously developed in the NF1st project is to say that energy efficiency solutions are processes, technologies, and practices that help us to do the same activities, like lighting our homes or powering machines, while consuming less energy. Here's an illustration to get us started. We're going to have a more systematic look in the next slide. But basically, we can make this rough distinction between energy supply infrastructure and energy efficiency solutions. I think energy supply infrastructure is quite straightforward. We have networks, we have generation, we have storage facilities, large-scale utility level, very capital-intensive, long-lived infrastructures. That's the general idea. On the other hand, we've got energy efficiency solutions, and here is where it gets a little tricky. We've got the traditional examples like end-use energy efficiency, efficient appliances, building renovation, efficient machinery in the industry and tertiary sectors. But what is very important in the context of E1st as well, and what is very often mentioned also in the legal documents, is demand-side flexibility. Why demand-side flexibility, you may ask? It's only shifting energy. It's not necessarily reducing energy from the consumer side. However, it does reduce energy consumption in primary energy terms. and it improves the ratio of useful energy output over primary energy input. So as a practical example, if we shift load at peak times and an expensive and also very polluting gas power plant doesn't need to be used, and then we have saved primary energy from a system perspective, which basically improves energy efficiency overall. So therefore, demand-side flexibility in this context is also sometimes referred to as system efficiency. Here on this next slide, we have a more detailed look. I think this is a very important slide, and maybe we can take the chance to also discuss this if you have different views about this. But I strongly believe that we shouldn't limit energy efficiency to end-use energy efficiency. Examples could be, as I've said before, efficient appliances, building renovation as well. But what I strongly argue for is to see energy efficiency as being relevant across the entire energy conversion chain. So here's a kind of simplified mathematical representation of energy efficiency. As you all probably know, energy efficiency is in its very basic form, it means useful output over energy input. And we can disaggregate this further. If we look at the ratio of secondary energy to the primary energy, this is something that could be referred to as conversion efficiency. And here we can make a distinction, let's say, or we can have two examples of an efficient variant, like a wind turbine, versus a relatively inefficient variant, like a gas power plant. Then it goes on with distribution efficiency. If we stick to the example of the energy conversion chain for heating homes, we could look at the difference between high voltage direct current, which is a very high-tech technology in energy or in electricity transmission, versus more traditional high voltage alternating current, which is less efficient, so which has higher line losses when distributing electricity. Then here we've already talked about end-use energy efficiency. So a ground source heat pump obviously is much more efficient than an electric resistance heater. So this would be an energy efficiency solution as well. Then there's a thing called, or I would refer to as service efficiency. So the amount of useful energy input per energy service. Here, for example, a well-insulated home is obviously more energy efficient than an old poorly insulated home. And finally, which is kind of at the boundaries of the energy efficiency concept, is energy sufficiency. So how much energy service do we actually need per unit of utility? It should say, not utility. For example, a small but well-designed home can deliver the same degree of well-being and the same degree of utility than a large but poorly designed home. So as you can see, energy efficiency is very relevant across the conversion chain, and we shouldn't limit it at all to building renovation, all these very traditional examples of energy efficiency. So that's a very important message I've been trying to get across. And I think this is also something that resonates with the legal documents about efficiency first, but particularly Article 3 of the new EED, which also adopts this slightly wider scope of energy efficiency. So what that means is that we ideally, when we carry out CBA in regional energy planning, we shouldn't limit ourselves to these traditional examples. We should look at energy efficiency potentials throughout the energy system. So this brings us to the question of how to assess the potential of energy efficiency solutions. So the relatively simple and traditional approach is to look at energy efficiency in isolation and to basically keep the supply side constant. And what we need for that is material costs, labor costs for installing energy efficient equipment, maintenance cost, and a few other inputs. Usually we're going to have a model. Later we're going to discuss what exactly model is, but in its simplest form, it can also be like a simple Excel calculation as we did in the Regio1st CBA tool. And then this yields quantitative, mostly financial outputs. Very established metrics are net present value, return on investment. We have return on investment twice, I just see. Discount payback period, simple payback period, and so on. Question, how many of you are familiar with basic finance, basic accounting, and do these metrics like net present value, internal rate of return, do they generally ring a bell? I'm wondering, could you maybe raise your hand if you've kind of seen it before, or if it's like completely new to you? And maybe I can accelerate these slides a little. Okay, so it seems like it makes sense to briefly go through this again. It's not an awful lot of slides as well, and the math here might seem a little intimidating at first sight, but it's actually when you calculate it, if you happen to calculate it yourself, it's not that difficult. The bottom line here is you need some sort of performance metric in the end to assess whether energy efficiency is beneficial or not. And these are basically 5 different ways to do it. But if energy efficiency is cost effective or profitable, all these 5 indicators will basically tell you the same thing. They're just used in slightly different contexts or in slightly different applications. But the message throughout will be the same. Is it worth it to pursue this or that energy efficient or to adopt this technology or not? Net present value just calculates the difference between the initial cost and the savings you make over time. That's the internal rate of return, which is very useful for comparing different investments. We've got, in terms of payback period, many of you are probably familiar with, we've got the discounted payback period, which is mathematically and in financial economics the more appropriate thing, because it takes into account discounting and the discount rate, whereas the simple payback period is a simplified indicator that is used for quick and preliminary assessments. And we've got the return on investment, which is also like a simplified metric. Let's have a look at this with a practical example. Let's assume we're trying to figure out if we should pursue energy efficient windows in a public building. Maybe we've got an initial investment for the windows of 5,000 euros, annual energy savings that amount to 500 euros per year. Lifetime of the windows maybe 20 years. And a discount rate of perhaps 5% per year. These are all exemplary numbers. It doesn't mean that these are super realistic numbers. It's just to illustrate these different metrics. When we calculate the net present value, this would here result in a value of about 1,200 euros. So this indicates that retrofit is expected to add this amount over its 20-year lifespan. So it's a cost-effective investment. It's positive. It makes sense. And similar things expressed through the internal rate of return, which here is 7.75%. The important thing is that the internal rate of return is higher than the discount rate, which is the case here. So it's an attractive investment. Discounted payback period is here 15 years. So it means it will take 15 years for the discounted cash flows to recover the initial investment cost. So as long as the discounted payback period is lower than the lifetime of the investment, again, it's a profitable investment. And maybe also interesting is the return on investment, 10%. It indicates that each year the homeowner in this case effectively recovers 10% of the upfront cost through reduced energy expenses. There's no need to understand each and every of these metrics now. There's very good literature about this, very understandable literature, I would say as well, that I can refer you to afterwards if you want to have a deeper understanding about this. And we're going to come back to these metrics later, because this is a very simplified example. And usually in the scope of the IEECP principle and regional energy planning, we're going to have multiple, not only competing energy efficiency options, but also multiple competing energy supply options. And in the end, we're trying to bring this all together. And in these cases, these kind of basic metrics are unfortunately not sufficient, but doesn't mean that it's super complicated. We're just gonna get back to this at a later slide. But maybe a question to address here is how to find techno-economic input data for energy efficiency. So I would strongly recommend you to check out our technology catalog tool, which we compiled as part of the Regio1st planning framework. It provides a list of demand-side energy efficiency measures, together with references, websites to collect data, and there are the technical data like energy savings achieved and cost. So, for example, the investment expenditures. And more specifically, the tool, we didn't gather data from scratch, but we basically compiled 3 main sources of data. One is the EU reference scenario 2020, the technology assumptions therein, which has been going through a very lengthy and complicated stakeholder engagement process, and the Commission has been involved, modelers have been involved. So we find that this is very well-founded, very substantiated data that is good to get started with. Second is the so-called DEEP platform, which you're also very welcome to check out online. It provides actually empirical data of different energy efficiency measures and their cost. So this can be quite useful as well. And then finally, especially when it comes to machinery and appliances and processes, there's a European product registry as part of the EU eco-design directive and regulation. So this provides a nice database as well, especially for the technical side. So what savings could be achieved, what are the technical properties of different options, and so on. Second step, assessing the potential of renewable energy sources. So here, as the framework guidance suggests, it's about evaluating the potential of available renewable energy resources in the region, solar, wind, biomass, hydro, geothermal, etc., and to identify the most promising renewable energy options. As we know, the net zero target in the EU is basically set, and we're all striving to contribute to achieving this target. And obviously, energy efficiency is only one side of the equation. We should also be looking at renewable energy options. One might say, in the scope of the efficiency first principle, that energy efficiency on the demand side and renewable energies are kind of competing with each other, which to some extent is true. But what is also important is that energy efficiency reduces the need for renewable energy infrastructure and renewable energy generation to actually meet the net zero target by 2050. So both are actually complementary in nature. So that's why we have a look at. That's why we should be having a look at this as well. What main types of renewables are of interest? I think this is quite straightforward. We've got solar energy in different forms, PV, concentrated solar power, solar heating and cooling in buildings, hydropower, which has its more questionable, let's say, environmental impacts, but still it's an important resource. Run-of-river hydro, pump storage, and traditional dams, geothermal energy. There's direct use of geothermal power plants, and also geothermal heat pumps could be listed here. Wind energy, bioenergy, and so on. So I think this is quite straightforward. These are all solutions that, according to many scenarios and many studies that have been made, are fundamental to achieving the net zero target. So we shouldn't ignore those. Determining the potential of renewables is kind of a research field itself, and as you can imagine, potentials for renewables are not only location specific but also time specific, which makes things tricky when it comes to modeling and when it comes to cost benefit analysis. So usually, to determine the technical potential of renewables, we go through 4 steps. First is resource assessment, so quantifying where the resources are located using satellite data and historical weather data. Then we've got technological constraints, for example, the efficiency of solar panels, capacity factors for wind turbines, etc. We've got spatial constraints as well, land availability, protection zones, etc. And then finally, we would go over to a performance simulation, so using dedicated models to simulate the hourly performance, ideally, of technology under various conditions to estimate energy output. Usually this is not something you do from scratch or you do yourself. If you have one very specific location and you have reliable data, it's okay to assume a capacity factor for wind turbines and to use a yearly value. But usually what comes into play here are geographic information systems, GIS. If you're interested, there's a cool online tool called Renewables Ninja that you can check out. It's a nice thing to play around with. There's a map of Europe, and you can basically pick any location in Europe, and you can pick different technologies like wind and solar and so on, and check out the hourly performance of these technologies. So there's a very sophisticated weather modeling engine here behind it, and taking into account all the different weather conditions, and not only by location but also throughout the year. And so this is a quite convenient tool that we at our institute have also been using comprehensively in modeling exercises. So if you have the chance, doesn't need to be now, feel free to check this out sometime. We haven't been involved in the development of this, but I feel like this is a very nice resource to get started and to illustrate this process of determining the potential for renewables. What about economic and financial data for renewables? Here again, I would warmly invite you to check out the technology catalog tool, in which again we didn't collect new primary data, let's say, but we're mostly referring to the Danish Energy Agency's technology catalogs, which as of now is the most comprehensive and most reliable source for energy technology data that you will probably find out there, at least in the European context. So when you go to this website, you will find different Excel sheets for different types of both renewable and also conventional energy supply technologies, and also it looks at individual heat supply technologies in homes and businesses. And it provides very, very comprehensive data, not only investment expenditures, but also operation and maintenance costs, other costs that could be included. So this definitely worth checking out. But now you may be asking, hey, Tim, this is data for Denmark. I'm living in Spain or Greece or somewhere else. I probably can't use this data right away, right? This is what the next slide is about. So we can make, unless you have any native, let's say, or locally harvested data, let's say from your region, there's a simple tweak that you can use to reasonably convert data from Denmark in this case, which provided these technology catalogs, to your local context. So here's an illustrative problem. Let's say that we want to know the cost for an onshore wind turbine in Denmark, in Spain, and we know that in Denmark it costs like 1,200,000 euros per megawatt of installed capacity, or 1.2 million euros, if you will. And in the absence of specific data, how do you find the equivalent cost of a wind turbine in Spain? Here we can use a nice proxy solution that we also tend to use quite often in different modeling studies. Is to use price level indices. So these indices basically provide a comparison of countries' price levels, normally in relation to the EU average, and this helps to understand the differences in price levels for different goods and services between countries. So there are, for example, price levels for machinery. There are price levels for labor costs. There are price levels even for heating technologies or for consumer appliances. So Eurostat is your friend here. It provides all of this data in a very accessible form. So here is an illustrative example for the wind turbine. What we would do is we would have the cost for the wind turbine, which, as I said, around like 1.2 million or 1,200 kilo euros per megawatt of installed capacity. We know from the Danish Energy Agency's technology data that about 63% of this is equipment costs. Then we've got installation costs, so which is basically labor and people having to use their hands and machinery to install the equipment. and we've got other costs, which could be costs for land use, for example. And here in this example, we would use a price level for machinery. This is what comes closest to this category of wind turbines. And we see that in Spain, for example, machinery is slightly more expensive than in Denmark. So a value of 100 basically means that it corresponds to the EU average. But here we see some slight differences. But what is more important when it comes to labor cost, we see that labor in Spain is much cheaper than in Denmark due to minimum wage legislation and different labor market conditions. So we can do some very simple math using these indices, and in this example, we would end up with a value of about 1.162 million euros per megawatt of wind turbine capacity, which is slightly less expensive than in Denmark. So this is the general logic that you can also apply to other technologies if you happen to not have the specific data yourself. Now comes perhaps a frightening part at first sight, but I'm hoping that I can provide some tangible ways in how to approach this topic of modeling and scenarios, and especially how to involve stakeholders, because we know, like, throughout this Regio1st framework, stakeholder engagement is very important. You don't want to have this top-down process where you just decide things, but having stakeholder feedback throughout, and I believe this is also very important when it comes to modeling. Modeling, it tries to be like a rational, objective approach, but in many ways it is not. So therefore, it's important to hear stakeholders' views about this as well. But maybe again, a brief overview of what are we trying to achieve here in this step. We're trying to agree on modeling approaches and scenarios, trying to determine key assumptions. Stakeholders should be given the opportunity to provide data and evidence, etc. So there are quite a lot of particular aspects here to look at, and maybe very fundamentally, because it's sometimes put on a pedestal, like this topic of modeling. Maybe let's start with understanding modeling. So modeling in the context of energy systems, and more generally, it refers to the creation of a simplified representation of a real-world system in order to better understand, analyze, and predict behavior under different conditions. As I briefly mentioned, models can be done in Excel, for example. Like usually that's more on the simpler end of the range of models. Models can be written in code. There are models that are very user-friendly, come with a user interface. But especially in the research domain, models are often very ugly and inaccessible. It's often just a bunch of code, and you press a button, and then you get a bunch of numeric output, and then you have to deal with that separately. But you will also encounter some models that are user-friendly, that lead you through this process. But overall, models are always representations and simplifications, especially of reality. So you will never get an objective representation of what is actually going on. You will always have to. There are always different aspects that you will highlight in a model, and in return, other aspects that you will tend to ignore in the model. So a model will never be perfect. It's just a decision support instrument in our context. This also leads into these key aspects of modeling abstraction. So creating a simplified version, we have the mathematical representation. So there are also qualitative scenarios sometimes that are being used, but in our domain, more frequently we deal with quantitative models, which involve some sort of mathematical representation, which again can be relatively easy, but they are also very sophisticated, stochastic, high-end models, but which then sometimes take several weeks to run a single scenario. But that's another story. Validation and calibration models, or at least there's an attempt to ensure the accuracy of models by calibrating them to a certain base year. And then there's scenario analysis, which is basically an approach that you use using models. So a scenario is basically running the model under different hypothetical settings to explore potential outcomes. So like changes in policy, technology, market conditions, and environmental factors. And of course, as I've mentioned, models are about decision support. So we're not doing it for the sake of it. You can play around with models, which can be fun for a few hours, but at the end of the day, we're trying to make decisions based upon it. And as we will also see later, models have its very inherent flaws and limitations, and also cost-benefit analysis, which uses models, has its limitations. So it's one decision support instrument that we use, and which then later also leads us to stage 6, in which we try to incorporate more qualitative and more and factors that are less tangible in the overall decision making. A question that I've asked myself, and maybe it's a good occasion to discuss this now, is how complex is modeling, and should I get help to do it? Which I believe is a quite relevant question from you at the Regio's end. So there are many factors that make modeling very complex. You've already encountered data collection. I've also mentioned there are different modeling tools. You could be using simplified tools as we do here in Regio1st with the CBA tool, but this doesn't provide neither a comprehensive view of the entire energy system, and it doesn't incorporate all the complexities of the energy system in terms of consumer behavior, for example, the effect of prices and so on. So this is difficult. Integration of different technologies and practices. In the Regio1st CBA tool, we only look at a small subset of the energy system, which is heating planning. So comparing building renovation, for example, to different heat supply options. But of course, there's a lot of other stuff going on in the energy system with electricity supply, which has its own intricacies, the gas supply, heat, hydrogen, and of course, different energy efficiency options, as we've already explored before. And then, of course, there's cost-benefit analysis, which has its difficulties. So in CBA, we're trying to assess the economic feasibility of different technologies and practices, including the wider impacts, which doesn't make things easier at all. So therefore, here I've got this table of pros and cons of carrying out the energy systems modeling yourself or getting professional help from consultants. Pros, doing it yourself, low upfront costs, you're in full control, you develop internal skills, and you've got flexibility if stuff is, if any unforeseen things are happening, if you need to adjust some settings in different scenarios and so on. Cons, expertise might be limited, completion time might be longer, potential for errors, and also, depending on these factors, credibility might be lower than as if a professional would have carried it out. If you get consultants, you get specialized expertise, advanced resources, higher quality, faster completion, increased credibility. But of course, consultants are very, very expensive. You are less in control of what is happening. And ultimately, you're always dependent on external help for future projects. So this is the overall setting, and I believe that the bottom line is the decision depends on the regions or the municipalities' current capabilities, budget, timeline, and long-term strategic goals. And personally, I believe for a rather complex project like developing a comprehensive energy plan for 2050, based on or taking into account the efficiency first principle and taking into account all this topic of multiple benefits and also the net zero target by 2050, I strongly believe that professional help can ensure a more robust and credible outcome. Because as I've mentioned, I work in this modeling team, and there's we're also basically reinventing things every day, because the future or the situation is moving very, very fast. There's new evidence coming in every day. Like when I started this job like five to 6 years ago, we were still discussing like 80% reduction scenarios by 2050, which didn't involve much of hydrogen. District heating was still a big thing in terms of flexibility. But now with a net zero constraint by 2050, things have changed drastically, and therefore modeling has become more complex, and all the sectors have been more intertwined and more related. So I'm wondering, since we're now talking about this from the region's end, is there already like a region that has decided on whether carrying out the CBA themselves, or hiring externals is more suitable or appropriate? Anyone who would like to share some experiences? That's okay. You don't have to. Marta. Yeah.
Yeah, on our hand, it's not. We will have internally the skills to do it, so we have the chance to be able to do it ourselves. But this might not apply to everyone. So I guess it will be interesting to have the perspective of someone maybe who don't have this type of staff, who have this type of skills available as well.
Yeah, let's see if we can. Bless. Yeah.
The idea for that, of course, is when the standard regions don't have the capacity for carrying out such modeling exercises and actually trying to get all the numbers and the options, but what the regions can provide eventually is the alternatives and the baseline, what we require. So what they are having in their regional plan and what are possible alternatives they could examine that could be aligned with their operational programs. Alternatives means demand side investments, like on energy efficiency, what Tim just now explained. The degree of the complexity of the model, of course, and of the quantification is completely up to the region. I mean, it could be given, it could be outsourced to one, for example, consultant or to a staff to carry out some calculations. It could be given to the consortium for some basic stuff during the regional first implementation, or it could even be, as it are open tools, it could be modified in such a way that they just needed to fill in 3, 4, 5 values and get some indicative results. And based on that, they can start the discussion and eventually, go to more in-depth quantification. So it's completely open. There is different options, as Tim will also show later on, and we can define the degree of complexity and can be a la carte in a way based on what regions and what capacity regions have. So, I mean, this problem can be easily overcome even within or outside the consortium. Okay.
Yeah. Thanks, Lasis. Okay. Then maybe let's continue. I've already mentioned how scenarios relate to modeling. So basically, scenarios are like the application of the model under different framework settings. And obviously, this is the sort of question: what kind of scenarios should I be looking at in the context of the E1st principle and in the context of regional planning that corresponds to the efficiency first principle? And our idea is basically that essentially you would only need 2 scenarios: an efficiency first scenario and then net zero energy supply infrastructure scenario. But maybe let's start with this question: is it absolutely necessary to have a baseline or a business as usual scenario when analyzing the first principle? Don't get confused by the term baseline. Of course, you need to know what's going on at present in your region in order to have a solid calibration of the models or of the tools that are being used. But do we need this classic business as usual EU reference scenario type scenario to analyze the first principle? Personally, I don't think so, because the reason is the first principle emphasizes proactive and forward-looking planning rather than reactive measures based on a current trajectory. So actually, this is an optional thing. Such a business as usual scenario can provide a useful reference to see how you're developing compared to a situation where you would basically do nothing. But it's not absolutely necessary. And if you want to save on resources, both in terms of finances and time, I think there's no problem in just getting over to efficiency first centered scenarios itself right away. What could this look like? So what could make sense is to basically contrast an energy efficiency first scenario, it's called here, with a net zero energy supply infrastructure scenario. And the idea is, and it's also something we've done in the NF1st project before, is that both scenarios would basically meet the net zero emissions target by 2050, but just with different means. One scenario, the net zero energy supply scenario, would strongly rely on renewable electricity supply, expansion of district heating networks with more traditional renewables like biomass. In terms of hydrogen, large-scale deployment of hydrogen infrastructure and using this hydrogen industry, transport, and heating in buildings instead of refurbishing and renovating buildings, increased reliance on electricity from renewables for heating, and also using hydrogen again. And then in turn, in the energy efficiency first scenario, we would basically look at the energy efficient counterparts to this energy supply infrastructure while still getting to the net zero target by 2050. And by comparing these two scenarios, you have a very nice comparison of the added value of actually prioritizing energy efficiency over traditional energy supply infrastructure. So, for example, in electricity supply, we would have a stronger look at demand-side flexibility to reduce demand and to optimize usage. Hydrogen usage would be limited to specific applications in industry and transport. Buildings, comprehensive promotion of building retrofitting, energy efficient appliances and lighting, and also comprehensive adoption of heat pumps, which is the more energy efficient equivalent to boilers and traditional heating systems. And in transport, for example, promotion of public transport, cycling and walking instead of using large-scale passenger car infrastructure and everyone driving individual electric vehicles. Of course, this is these scenarios are not set in stone, and you're very, very welcome to modify these scenario storylines not only within your organization but also in collaboration with the stakeholders. But this is something that maybe can get you started in the discussion. And as I've mentioned, if you like, you can also create a business as usual scenario, which gives you a slightly more, perhaps a slightly more interesting view about the delta between the net zero future, including the efficiency first principle, and the business as usual scenario. But personally, I believe that these two can be absolutely sufficient. And of course, if your scenarios are set up and if you're even in charge of the models yourself, you can go crazy with these different scenarios and look at different individual aspects. You could have one scenario where only building retrofits are focused on, and then look at the effects it has on energy cost savings and reduced energy supply capacities. That's something we did in the NF1st, or something we focused on in the NF1st project, for example. Or you could look at a district heating scenario where you have a strong focus on efficient heat pumps and waste heat recovery instead of just setting up traditional CHP or cogeneration plants and biomass cogeneration, for example. So this could be a scenario, an individual scenario. But overall, maybe take this for starters and then develop it further the way you think it's more most suitable and most appropriate to your context. Any questions or remarks about that? Or maybe also a question to you. Did you happen to start with the scenario storylines that you would want to investigate in your region, or did you already gather some ideas either internally or together with stakeholders? Someone who would like to share some experiences about that? Don't have to. Okay, otherwise we can move on. One thing that you will quite frequently encounter in the context of the efficiency first principle is the societal perspective. So why emphasize the societal perspective in modeling the first principle and in applying cost-benefit analysis? So the first principle is not about just optimizing private decisions and everyone is doing the best they can, but for policy to take an active role in making sure that those technologies and practices are adopted that provide the biggest benefits to society overall, including the range of intangible, let's say, wider benefits and multiple benefits. So efficiency first is about getting the best of the energy system overall. So therefore, we adopt the societal perspective, which in the CBA literature is also sometimes referred to as economic perspective or economic analysis, and the private perspective, sometimes known as financial analysis. And here we have made an attempt to disaggregate different cost types, and if or not these cost types would be integrated in the respective under the respective perspective. And as you can see here, we have like direct or priced costs, so basically costs that have an immediate price tag on it. But we also have costs that are unpriced, where some additional estimates would come into play. And one of the big differences is between the private perspective and the societal perspective, so-called transfer payments. Transfer payments are taxes, levies, but also subsidies like public grants and loans. You can see here that from a private perspective, for example, from the perspective of a building owner, a company, a power plant operator, these are definitely important to take into account because they affect your immediate business or as a homeowner, your immediate financial decision and the results from it. So therefore, of course, you would want to take into account if you get money from the state for renovating your home. But this is different from a societal perspective, and that's an important aspect when you look at this, an important methodological aspect. From a public perspective, if we stick to the subsidy example, these are transfer payments because in society, it doesn't matter if person A has the money or person B has it. It's just a redistribution of money. So if we take the subsidy, of course, this money needs to come from somewhere. And typically, this is taxpayers' money. So there are other taxpayers who are basically co-funding your building retrofit. And therefore, from a societal perspective, so seeing it as society and our members of society overall, we wouldn't take into account these subsidies. We would take the default gross price of the different technologies. So if you have a building retrofit, you take the overall price. You don't take the price with the discount through the subsidy. So that's an important difference between societal and private perspective, which can obviously in practice make a big difference. Here you see other differences, policy implementation costs, like administrative costs for carrying out a subsidy program, not the subsidy itself, but like the administrative hassle that you have throughout different government agencies. These, of course, as an individual, I don't care. But from a societal perspective, these should be taken into account to the extent possible. There are, for example, the European Commission's better regulation guidelines, which provide some rough proxy estimates about these administrative costs in different contexts, which can be taken into account here. And what you would also take into account under the societal perspective are so-called secondary market effects. These could be employment effects, for example. Again, under the private perspective, if you're a building owner, you don't care if jobs are created through building renovation overall, but from a societal perspective, this can be very relevant. And then we get to these indirect costs. Many or all of which can be qualified as multiple benefits or multiple impacts. We have external costs like air pollution damage or greenhouse gas damage. Again, as an individual, unless I'm a very altruistic person and I care about the planet and everyone around me, I have the rights to take this into account if I want to. But usually, as a business, you have no inherent financial incentive to take into account, let's say, air pollution damage costs. But of course, this is very relevant from a societal perspective. So again, we have differences here. Transaction costs are kind of a tricky thing. They're tricky to quantify, and they're not very established in cost-benefit analysis yet. This can be, for example, a time hassle for finding contractors. If you are a homeowner and you plan a building retrofit, there's a lot of hassle involved. You need to find these contractors. You need to figure out the contracts. You need to make sure that they are credible, that they provide the right services, and all of this takes time. And this is something that actually, or that arguably prevents many people from undergoing these small scale investments because of the hassle involved. Here, and then private perspective, this could be taken into account, but it's more common to do this from a societal perspective. Other costs, it's kind of a similar story. Usually after or in response to or resulting from building retrofits, you have a better indoor comfort, more stable indoor temperature, less humidity, etc. This is something you could quantify if you are a homeowner. And you could also quantify the monetary terms and thus include it in the CBA, but it's very difficult usually. So for an individual, this is hard. But again, from a societal perspective, which you as planners would qualify as, this is something you might want to have a look at. Any questions about the societal perspective? Why it's important at all? If you like, I can also refer you to some nice, straightforward reports and literature about this. There's a very established, well-established CBA guidebook from the European Commission that also deals with these aspects in depth. So after the workshop, I'm also going to compile some resources that you can have a look at to get a more in-depth understanding about this. Okay.
I was thinking, Tim, on this aspect, and you proposed it a bit earlier already. Maybe to insert links directly on the slide for people if they want to dig further. Like that, it also takes you out the task of sending to sending the list at the links, sorry, as a follow-up.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, we'll do. Yeah, actually makes more sense. Everything in one place. Jean-Sebastian just wrote a comment. With the link with considering how strategic a decision is. If you like, Jean-Sebastian, you can also speak up unless you're busy. Okay.
Yeah, no, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, no, that was just this topic of the societal perspective, as you mentioned, that's usually connected to the issue of multiple impacts or multiple benefits. And what we see by experience is that in practice you cannot assess everything. That's impossible. So you can use default values sometimes, etc. But it depends whether they hold many. I mean, if the range is too broad, it does not tell you anything. So when you have default values that have small uncertainties, that's fine. When they have higher uncertainties, that's a bit useless. And then you need to prioritize what you look at, and for that to take into account the viewpoint of the stakeholders, usually the investors or the decision makers. That's useful to know where to prioritize the modeling effort or the assessment efforts, the data collection efforts, and so on. And there was a good project on that and benefit for investment made by companies. I don't know if there is an equivalent for local authorities. There was the ERA data project that you probably have covered already in Regio1st. But I would say ERA data was very nice. It provided very good examples, but it actually showed this difficulty because it was too much assuming that you can assess everything from my viewpoint. I stop here.
Thanks, Jean-Sebastian. Yeah, that's actually the big limitation of CBA that we're also gonna look at in a couple of slides. Is that in CBA requires that you can express every impact or every cost item in monetary terms in euros. And of course, when we look at indoor comfort in buildings, what is the euro value of having less humidity or I don't know, 1 degree Celsius of additional temperature in your home? Like this is a non-trivial question, and it's very context specific. And as Jean-Sébastien has mentioned, there are some benchmark values that have been developed in recent projects to facilitate this quantification. But still, this is very difficult, and the same goes for transaction costs, for these externalities, external costs. Things are a little more established, but then still, at the end of the day, things will always be context specific. And especially when you engage stakeholders, people can easily be like, "Hey, I don't think that greenhouse gas reduction or the cost of greenhouse gases should be, I don't know, 300 euros per ton. I don't really care about it. It should only be 50 euros per ton. Why do you use this value in your modeling?" So this is very inherently controversial, and it's a big drawback of CBA. You're trying to make things rational and try to make objective decisions, but the assumptions and the inputs you put into this analysis, they're not objective at all. These are value decisions, and it's a big problem, and it's not only a practical problem for you, but also a scientific problem that we're dealing with every day. But still, very, very exciting tool. Yeah.
Tim, can I add here? We have faced that also in several occasions when you come into debates about this, what types of values you use in the external costs and the multiple benefits and all that in the quantifications. Indeed, the issue indeed is broad and difficult, and it's a lot of biases for sure. But from the point that we're speaking about policy angles, and everything is linked to an NECP or to a regional plan, we stick to the values used for the NECPs, for the externalities. That's the safest way and the more objective way. You know, the primes has already also these values behind it. We can, of course, complement with own values from the tools probably that you will discuss, or I mean the MICAT and other stuff, that there are several projects in this direction that generate values, which can be complemented. But I would say for the basic ones, like for instance, how much does energy efficiency contribute to GDP? Yes, this is a primes value for that. We have to use this one because that's kind of the most acknowledged and based on what all the assumptions of the planning are being made, and of the NECP of every country and all that. So I understand the complexity, but still there are some values. Maybe it's not the best, but still they are kind of objective and commonly agreed upon which the planning was made. So we have to be using the same values of externalities also for this type of assessments we do.
Yeah, thanks for pointing this out, Vasis. Totally agree. Like there will always be skeptics, but by now, like this whole debate, especially about multiple benefits, has developed a lot, like over 10 years or so. And by now we have quite reliable data about this that I'm also gonna point you at later. So perhaps before we get there, the step of the framework is also much about stakeholder involvement, and as you've probably figured out by now, like modeling has a lot of intricacies, and there's a lot of different decisions that you can make, be it about the scenarios that you investigate, the input values that you use. Also the scope, which technologies do you want to include, which or which sectors or technologies do you exclude. So here's a very high-level overview of key aspects of modeling that you could discuss with stakeholders. So as I've said, like priorities and objectives, data collection, which also leans into the previous stage of the framework, which scenarios to analyze, assumptions and parameters, as Lazis has just pointed out. What value do we use for greenhouse gas damage or for different costs? Also, there's the issue of discount rates, which is not covered here today, but which is a very ongoing issue that is always being debated. Types of stakeholders to involve. I'm sure you're very much aware of that. So we want to have a broad coverage: government, utilities, industry, research, etc. Methods for engaging stakeholders. It could be workshops, it could be surveys and questionnaires, it could be focus groups, public consultations. So this is something to get you started. Which kind of leads me to the question: has any or has one of the regions present today already thought about the stakeholder engagement process in the context of modeling and cost benefit analysis, and how to how to pursue this and how to carry this out. Is there someone who would like to share some experiences about that? Because I'm pretty sure it's very challenging to even deal with the previous steps of the framework, the data collection especially. But as we see throughout the framework, stakeholder engagement is key, especially at the regional level, because we have different or more accessible modes of engagement there. Okay. Next step of the framework, modeling future techno-economic options. So this is a lot of ground of this, as we've basically already covered in the previous slide. So this is about actually carrying out the modeling, pressing a button, getting the quantitative results and analyzing them. So under different scenarios, considering both the direct costs and the indirect costs. So one question I would like to get back here is how to measure scenario performance in cost-benefit analysis. Previously, we looked at a very simple or relatively simple situation, which was a single energy efficiency measure in the form of energy efficient windows, for which there are some rather straightforward performance indicators that can be used. So in these situations, using indicators like net present value can be very effective. But the big limitation here is that you're only looking at one technology. And the other limitation is that everything that is happening on the supply side is being, as we call the modeling, an exogenous value. So you need to make assumptions about how the price for supplying the price for gas or the price of a gas boiler and the heat that a gas boiler generates evolves over time. And then if you want to take into account different technologies, you need to run this calculation again and again and recalculate the net present value or any other indicators. So in practice and in modeling, it's rather uncommon to look at one specific technology or one specific energy efficiency measure. And I pretty much suppose this is also not what you have in mind at the regional level when it comes to these planning processes. You want to have a nice mix of energy efficiency solutions, not only in buildings and not only renovation, but also in the industry and transport, and as we've seen before, throughout the energy conversion chain. But you also want to take into account the different options there are on the supply side. Renewables, hydrogen, district heating, etc. So that's why once things start to get a little more complex, which I believe is the case, or which is justified in regional energy planning, we get into energy systems modeling, of which here you see an illustration from the so-called energy plan model, which is a model being developed by Aalborg University in Denmark, which is quite established in the modeling scene. And here you see lots of arrows, lots of different colors, and the colors are basically different energy vectors or energy carriers. There's no need to understand all of this now. Just the message is that energy systems as they are today, everything's interrelated. And to some extent, it can be nice to have isolated analysis, such as we do in the Regio1st CBA tool, which only looks at building renovation versus heat technologies. But ultimately, when it comes to regional energy planning, also national planning and NECPs, things are intertwined and things are complex. For example, when we look at building renovation versus installing the heat pump without any renovation, we need to ask ourselves, where does the electricity for the heat pump come from? Or likewise, when we look at the gas boiler, we would want to know what's the mix of the gas, what's the degree, what's the share of biomethane and biogas, and to what extent does hydrogen play a role? So this all automatically leads into energy supply modeling as well. And therefore, in order to measure scenario performance in CBA, especially in this context, we tend to use metrics such as energy system cost. So energy system cost evaluates the total cost associated with the entire energy system, which includes investments, operating costs, and all other costs involved, including also the multiple benefits to the extent possible. Here's a practical example from the IEECP project using energy system cost to measure scenario performance. In IEECP, we looked at 3 scenarios for the building sector. one with very low renovation rates and very low ambition for building retrofits, and then there's a medium efficiency scenario with moderate ambitions for building retrofits and a higher efficiency scenario. And we also modeled the supply side of the energy system, and in the end, we looked at this indicator of energy system cost, which here included capital costs, fuel costs, operational maintenance, and so-called other costs, in which in NF1st, we only unfortunately scratched at the surface of the wide range of multiple benefits, because we only looked at CO2 emission costs and air pollution damage, which of course is only the tip of the iceberg. But still, this provided a very nice analysis. And here, in terms of this energy system cost, we can see the additional cost on the one hand for building renovation, that is the green large chunk here. And we also looked at efficient electrical appliances. And then in turn, you can see the cost saved for district heating generation, district heating networks, electricity generation, electricity networks, hydrogen generation, and these negative externalities in the form of CO2 and air pollution. So this is something I would warmly recommend once things start to get a little more complex. Actually, you don't do yourself a favor if you look at individual technologies and calculating the net present value or the internal rate of return for a single investment. But it makes a lot of sense to merge everything into scenarios and then using energy system cost as an aggregate indicator. Of course, again, which we also discussed before, provided that all these impacts can be quantified in euros in monetary terms. Right. I think after the training today, after the workshop, I'm also going to go through the slides again and provide some more accessible references. Here are some selected references, but I think on the other slides, it won't do no harm to guide you to some additional literature and easily digestible literature. Okay. Unless there are any comments about this, any questions, this leads us into monetizing benefits and wider impacts. So again, here's a quick overview of the step. In addition to direct price costs like the equipment costs, installation costs, fuel costs, operation and maintenance costs, we also want to look at unpriced benefits and wider impacts, because as we figured out, efficiency first has this societal focus, this public perspective, and trying to find the mix of technology and practices that basically maximizes benefits for everyone. So this involves environmental aspects, social aspects, economic aspects. So maybe for starters, what are wider or multiple benefits? So personally, I would understand them as a social, environmental, economic effects that arise from implementing energy-related technologies and practices. Not only energy efficiency, multiple benefits can also be attributed to renewables, for example, but which in any case are not immediate personal financial gains or losses that appear on an energy bill. Sometimes energy savings are understood as a multiple benefit. That's one interpretation, but I think it makes it makes a clearer case if we understand it as those aspects that are not immediately tangible in terms of financial costs or benefits. Here's an overview of multiple benefits from the Odyssey Neo project, which has been around for many years. You will find other overviews of multiple benefits in different reports. Many of you are probably familiar with this IEA report on multiple benefits, which has this flower chart of different multiple benefits. No matter what report you refer to, I think they're all pretty much on the same page when it comes to the range and the diversity of multiple benefits that they occur in the social domain when it comes to living comfort, for example, as we've talked about before, in the environmental domain when it comes to global and local pollutants, not only air pollution, but also water pollution, soil pollution, for example, but also in the economic domain. There are micro effects like the asset value, for example, after building renovation, your building will have a higher property value, but also there are also macroeconomic effects, impacts on GDP, employment, competitiveness, etc. So overall, there have been different attempts to categorize this, but I think this is a nice way to get started. how to quantify wider benefits. This is definitely not trivial. And by now, you will not encounter any energy system model out there that manages to represent both the dynamics and the complexities of the energy system in terms of energy flows and the financial and non-financial aspects that are involved. So usually we have, for example, at our institute, we have very sophisticated energy system models, but they only quantify like classic traditional metrics like investment expenditures, operating costs, etc. And they don't manage to take into account these wider benefits. So that's why normally you will have, which of course makes it not only difficult for us as researchers because we haven't gotten there yet, but it makes it even more difficult for you at the regional implementation level to actually make these quantifications. We're going to have a look at one particular tool in one of the next slides that can vastly facilitate this process for you. But just to give you some ideas of how this works in practice, there are 3 slides here about the different multiple benefit domains and what approaches are usually used to quantify these different impacts. Because ultimately you will need different basically models within a model to quantify these benefits because they are very complex, they have its intricacies, and this goes for pretty much each and every of these benefits. Maybe for the sake of time, we won't be going through each and every impact, but maybe let's look as an example at living comfort. So usually improved insulation, heating and cooling systems can make living and also working conditions in offices, for example, more comfortable and contribute to better health and well-being. And this could be quantified using survey-based measurements. And for the economists amongst you, there's so-called willingness to pay and willingness to accept methods, and conjoint analysis and discrete choice experiments, for example, which help you to figure out ultimately in euros how much people are valuing, let's say, 1 additional degree of indoor temperature. It could then be, I don't know, 1,000 euros per year. That's what it's worth it to me. But this is like a whole branch in economics that is in microeconomics, let's say, that is trying to make these calculations based on empirical data to figure out euro or monetary values, which can then in return be integrated into cost-benefit analysis. You can make similar exercises for these other indicators. You're probably very much familiar with the social cost of carbon or with estimates of greenhouse gas damage, which is often around like 300 euros per ton. And there are also estimates that go around 800 euros or estimates that are lower. But here again, like the basic economic logic is the same. It's just the approaches that are used that are different. Same goes for air quality, water use, land requirements. It's a limitation of CBA that probably you won't be having reliable numbers for each and every impact. But if you ask an economist, he or she would say that every property or every attribute, if you take the right means to quantify it, actually has a euro value. Like everything that people cherish or value can be expressed in euro terms. The only constraint is that from a practical or from a research perspective, it's very resource and time intensive to figure out these values. But if we had like unlimited research funds or so, it would be no problem to get very reliable data for multiple benefits across countries, across regions in Europe. Right, there's no need to look at every aspect of this now. Feel free to browse through the slides at a later stage and get back to us about this. Some colleagues of mine are very involved in the so-called MICA project, which I'm going to briefly present here. And some of you have probably heard of the Combi project, which has been around some years before. Basically, both of these projects attempted to quantify the wider benefits or the multiple benefits of energy efficiency, not only in physical terms, so not only in tons of air pollution avoided or reduced humidity in percent in buildings, but also in monetary terms, which makes it interesting for cost-benefit analysis. The Mika tool can be accessed on this website here. It's currently at in the beta stage, so it's not 100% up and running, but you can definitely check it out and see if how it works for you. There's now a follow-up project called Seed Mika, which is further developing the tool. And probably by the end of this year, we will have a very nice and stable running version of this tool. And basically, the Mika tool is designed to help quantify the wide range of benefits, as I've said, not only in physical units, but also in monetary units. It works by integrating different submodels and data inputs to estimate these wider benefits, and users, and that's where it gets interesting for you, users can enter custom parameters and custom, let's say, scenario settings, such as megawatt hours of energy saved in the building sector through building retrofits. What's the effect of this in the multiple benefits domain? This is something the tool is specifically designed for, and it's not only designed for national level estimates for the NECPs, for instance, but it can also be very useful at the regional and local level. So overall, it aims to assess the overall effects of energy efficiency measures, not just the traditional monetary effects. How to access the Mika tool? I've already mentioned this. So there's the online tool. It's online. It's free of charge. There's no registration necessary. So feel free whenever you have the time to check out this link. That's a link to the tool itself, but there's also the website, and both are interlinked. So there's no way you can miss it. And that's what can be said about that. I think that was my last slide about this whole topic of multiple benefits. Of course, we could talk about this endlessly, and there's a lot to be said about it. And of course, also, since I'm working at a research institute, I can say the research about this is ongoing. Empirical data is necessary, but also the modeling approaches to properly integrate this into cost-benefit analysis are still under continuous development. So you won't be having like an ultimate estimate that everyone will agree with of different energy efficiency solutions. And maybe just to illustrate this, we can zoom in here a little. This is a chart from one of the MICAT reports, which provides like monetary estimates in euros for example, health due to improved indoor climate, which is like this small chunk here. Employment effects, which are very small, impacts on GDP, which are measured here, CO2 reduction, which comes with its cost benefits. So that's how it works. And that's actually what you need for cost benefit analysis. But of course, it's very controversial, and ideally, you would want to take into account different variants of different settings and parameters in order to have the full range of potential outcomes, and this leads us to sensitivity analysis, which is one of the last steps we're going to look at today. I'm going to take a sip of water, and again, question to you: what's your experience so far with? Do you have any experience at all, like with quantifying these multiple benefits, either like in physical units or in financial and monetary units? Is it something you're aiming for, like in your regional energy plans? And if yes, to what extent? Did you already have some discussions about that? So happy to hear your feedback. Okay, that's all right. I mean, it's not the last chance today to talk about this, and I'm sure you guys are very, very busy with the previous stages of the framework at the moment. So once we get there, I'm very happy to get together again, to have like a workshop format in which we can go through specific problems again, taking into account your practical experiences, and then see how we can help you out with that. So this is now just something to get you started, to give you some guidance, and to see where you can, or what tools you can get started with. For example, the MICA tool. This also leads us to the following step: identifying optimal combinations of solutions. So this step basically states that by undertaking cost-benefit analysis, we should identify the least cost or greatest net benefit combinations of renewable energy sources and energy efficiency solutions at any traditional energy infrastructures that can achieve the region's energy objectives and targets. Here's an attempt from my end to illustrate this a little. So ultimately, let's say here along this line, we have an endless amount of different scenarios. Some are more centered on energy supply, others are more centered on energy efficiency, and basically we would have different combinations of energy consumption and energy system cost here on the vertical axis, and on the horizontal axis the energy consumption. So let's look at one of the situations that you might encounter here. Situation 1 is relatively low energy consumption but high cost. So this could be a situation where there's too much energy efficiency. Energy efficiency is highly cherished, it's highly valued, and there are good reasons for that. But also, energy efficiency comes in 99% of the technologies and practices. It comes at a cost, especially when we talk about building renovation, for example. There are huge investments that are needed for this, and there's no doubt about that. So this could also lead to an overinvestment in energy efficiency. So basically a situation where implementing additional energy efficiency measures exceeds the benefits from the energy savings. And as we've encountered in the first project, and if you remember these energy system cost charts from just a few minutes ago, it can also happen in a very high efficiency scenario with very strict energy efficiency standards, very high building renovation rates. We might end up in a situation where actually it would be more beneficial or cheaper for the economy or for society to have less energy efficiency and more renewable energy supply. But we could also have the inverse or reverse situation where there's relatively high energy consumption, but a situation with too much energy infrastructure and too less energy efficiency. So building more generation capacity, for example, can result in stranded assets and overly expensive energy system, where this capital expensive infrastructure is not fully utilized. And in mathematical terms, energy efficiency first, this energy efficiency first principle is about finding the sweet spot. It's about finding this spot along the line where energy system costs, including not only direct price costs, but also indirect price costs, such as the social environmental impact of air pollution, are minimized. So this would be in this illustration right here. Of course, we have an uncertainty range, so it could also be here or here. We don't really know. But this is the societal optimum we're actually looking for with the efficiency first principle and with the associated energy planning. So the optimal solution involves finding the right mix of investments in energy efficiency and energy supply. So it's a mix that would aim to minimize the total cost of energy provided or maximize benefits, if you will. So now you may ask yourself, hey, it's a fancy looking line. Like how can I reproduce this like in my regional energy planning? Basically, if you wanted to have this line, you would need to calculate like hundreds of scenarios, and then if you rank these scenarios according to energy system cost, you would end up with something like this. But as I've said, as I've mentioned before, since we have limited time and money, we need to focus on 1 or 2 or maybe 3 scenarios, depending on how expensive it is to or how much effort it takes to run them. So maybe ultimately you would end up with one scenario that is maybe located here and one that is located here, and then one scenario that somehow meets the optimal solution. Optimality is a very mathematical concept, and of course, taking into account all the uncertainties that we have in this topic of energy planning, it's something that, as long as we all live, we will probably won't be achieving. Also because we cannot predict certain things in the future, how technology prices are evolving, how consumer preferences are shifting, etc. Everything is very uncertain, so we're always going to be stuck in this uncertainty range right here. But that's the general idea of efficiency first and of carrying out cost-benefit analysis in this context. But this also leads us to sensitivity analysis. For those not familiar with the term, it's basically an approach especially in modeling and also in related cost-benefit analysis, in which we try to understand how the results react to changes in the input data. So let's say, what happens to my outcomes if the energy price develops so and so, or what happens if heat pumps are getting much cheaper than we anticipated. So this is something that sensitivity analysis is for. What approaches to sensitivity analysis are there? Scenario analysis could be understood as an approach of sensitivity analysis, because you look at different settings and different constraints and how they impact or how they affect the outcomes. There's also so-called one at a time analysis. So you change one input variable at a time while holding other variables constant. So for example, you would pick one scenario, and the only thing you would change is the discount rate, or the only thing you change is the energy or the gas price. And then you'll see how the optimal solution reacts, how energy system cost reacts, and how it basically changes the outcomes of the whole analysis. And then if you want to go crazy, if you want to get something like a super sophisticated approach, there's global sensitivity analysis, and it goes even further to Monte Carlo analysis, it's called, which uses different, or which makes simultaneous variation of all input parameters at once. And in Monte Carlo analysis, it's based on stochastic probabilities for different values, and it can get very sophisticated, but I don't believe it's like a use case, and it's often not a use case for us in the research institutes, because it's very computationally intensive. We have one model, the so-called anatime model, which we use every now and then. It takes up to 1 week to have a single model run, or to run a single scenario. And you can imagine that you don't want to have too many parameter variations, and that sensitivity analysis just gets very expensive, both in terms of money and time, very quickly. But there are some input variables that could or should be considered in sensitivity analysis. One is the discount rate, as I've mentioned before. That's like the interest rate used in discounted cash flow analysis. It's something that has always been debated in the modeling domain, and by now it's at least acknowledged that a societal perspective requires a relatively low discount rate, but still within the societal perspective, it can make a huge difference if your discount rate is, I don't know, 0.5% of it's 3% or so. So that's one thing you could look at. Fuel prices, I've already mentioned, demand growth. So for example, how does the living space in your region develop over time? You could have, I don't know, 2 or 3 variants with different estimates of living space, and how this affects your results. Resource availability, lifetimes of projects, public acceptance. So you could basically restrict certain technologies in the scenarios to see what the results would be, and so on. So that's basically it about sensitivity analysis. And as I've mentioned, it's not totally necessary, but it improves the credibility of your numbers, and it then also accommodates the views of different skeptics who would say, "Hey, I don't know, I think the fuel price for gas should be lower in that scenario," and which can be good in this overall stakeholder engagement process. If you just do these analysis for yourselves, and there won't be any public outreach at the end, it doesn't matter so much. But I think the more voices are involved, like the more important it is to also accommodate these different voices using, for example, sensitivity analysis. And since we briefly we talked about this every now and then before, limitations of CBA, and that's the last slide before we're going to have like a short break, like a short coffee break. We should be very much, that's the last slide here. We should be very much aware of the limitations of CBA. As I've said, the idea behind it is to rationalize, to objectivize this whole process of energy planning, but there will always be very inherent biases in there. Here's here are just a few aspects that make CBA complex, but these are just methodological limitations that are not yet fully addressed, both in research and practice. One is quantifying wider benefits. Of course, methods are still under development. We do have some estimates here and there, but uncertainty is all around. There's also like a separate item here, risk and uncertainty. Excuse me. So there's uncertainty in predicting future energy prices, policy impacts, technological advances, and so on. Scenario settings, like the discount rate, economic growth, emissions targets, etc. But also one thing to bear in mind is that CBA is kind of blind when or by default, it's rather blind when it comes to distributional impact. CBA in its traditional form focuses on aggregate costs and benefits, and it may not necessarily consider how these costs and benefits are distributed among different groups within society. What you would need then is a dedicated financial analysis, that means from the private perspective, taking the perspective of, let's say, low-income households or businesses or any other group in society that would be of interest to you, and then running the whole analysis again and then seeing how benefits and costs basically distribute within society. And again, often due to both time and budget constraints, these distribution analyses are not being carried out within the CBA framework. And overall, of course, this can obscure the impact on vulnerable groups or fail to address equity concerns. And there are some criteria and some multiple impacts, if you will, that are very hard to monetize and thus hard to integrate in the CBA. One is technology availability, like how easily available is like a large, let's say you have a large-scale building renovation program planned or resource. How available is the workforce? How available are the materials for the building? So this is, you can work with technology restrictions in CBA, but overall, this is something that can be that can also be quantified in other ways. Implementation duration, like sometimes for building renovation, it can be quite a hassle for the building occupants to live there with like scaffolding like in front of the buildings and so on. So this is like a criterion that is hard to monetize. System reliability, scalability. Let's say that you have a big advantage, for example, of district heating systems is that you can switch the generation side at whatever time in future while keeping the networks. So it provides some flexibility and scalability in future. Aesthetics are hard to monetize. Flexibility, scalability is kind of similar. Regulatory compliance and also distributional effects. And this ultimately leads us to the stage 6 workshop, which we have coming up next week, about assessing the practical feasibility of least cost solutions. So we're starting with the premise that cost-benefit analysis can give you a reasonable estimate of costs and benefits within your region, but it's inherently limited, both in methodological terms and in practical terms. So this is where the stage 6 comes into play, where we delve more into this aspect of assessing distribution impacts, the readiness of supply chains, assessing workforce capacity, and also having stakeholder consultations to gather feedback and review options. And there's one tool that George and Adriana from ICCS will be presenting. It's a multi-criteria decision analysis tool. Multi-criteria analysis is not the same thing as cost-benefit analysis. Multi-criteria analysis acknowledges that not all indicators or not all criteria can be expressed in euros or in monetary terms. And it's a tool that can be very useful in bringing together different intangible and difficult to monetize metrics within one systematic framework. So that's something we're going to look at in the coming week. So before I get a sore throat, I suggest that we take a very short break and then we look at the CBA tools that we've developed as part of the Regio1st project. So I suggest that we gather here again like 12 o'clock. I apologize if you don't have your usual lunch break today, but I hope that the presentation of the CBA tools will be interesting to you. So And I've briefly mentioned it at the beginning. We have two tools that we want to present today, and both have been presented already in previous sessions. First is the Regio1st CBA tool. Second is a tool that IEECP has developed as part of another study, but which is still very useful, and that Marco is going to lead us through later. And now you may wonder, hey, why do I need two different tools? Why can't it be one? The thing is, both of these tools are meant for illustrative purposes to basically show, for example, what difference a different energy price can make, what difference it can make in terms of assumptions and for your results. But these are not actual modeling tools in that sense that they can help you to carry out the entire energy systems modeling for your region. I've been trying to make that point like throughout this project and also throughout this presentation today, that modeling itself, if you want to do it properly and if you want to have credible outcomes, is very complex, and the times are over where you can have basically like one single Excel tool or so that does the job for you. Maybe like 30 years or so, things were a little easier. You had like one integrated power utility or so, and no one talked about hydrogen, barely anyone talked about district heating. And on the demand side, things were nicely separated. Houses were heated by oil and gas, and transport was running on oil fuels as well. So that was back then, and back then complexity was a little lower. But now, modern times require modern solutions, and unfortunately, those simplified tools that we are presenting here in Regio1st and also now in the following unfortunately won't do the job for you entirely, but they can give you a nice illustration, as I've said, and some nice ideas on how to move forward. And it's and I think it can be kind of fun to play around with the numbers and see how they react. So that's the idea about those. So I'm just going to go ahead with the Regio1st CBA tool, and then I'm going to hand over to Marco, who's going to talk about the IEECP tool. And just for context, the IEECP tool has a very nice focus on multiple benefits and quantifying them, and taking into account both the private and the societal perspective in cost-benefit analysis. The application case in both tools is the same, where we're looking at heating and cooling planning. So predominantly building renovation as an energy efficiency option versus the cost of energy of heat supply through either individual heating solutions or district heating and so on. In the Regio1st tool, we have different heating technologies, as I'm going to show. I was going to look at district heating, and we have one selected multiple benefit included, which is the social cost of carbon, but more about that in a second. So let's get started with that one. Cost-benefit analysis tool, I'm sure you can find it either on the website or on our SharePoint. The website is now officially up and running, so if you click around there, there's no way you can miss it. My colleague Sung Min was in charge of the development of that model. He's currently on parental leave and can't be here, but I'm going to be taking over for him. So what's the overall logic of the tool? So as I've mentioned, we're looking at the situation of heating planning, which involves in terms of energy sufficiency solutions, building retrofits most of all. So having existing buildings, applying thermal insulation, applying new efficient windows, and thereby reducing the so-called useful energy demand of buildings. But then we also have different heat supply options, both building integrated and district heating. And some of you might have followed this discussion around so-called fabric first. There have been many people who have been arguing that before installing any new heat equipment, the fabric should be insulated and the building should undergo a thermal retrofit in order to minimize the energy that is actually needed from the heating system. By now, the discussion is a little more nuanced or a little more pronounced. We've seen that heat pumps, for example, also work in unrenovated buildings and also in cold climates. And it's not always, and not only from a technical, but also not from a financial perspective, necessary to renovate a building before installing a new heat supply system. And this is basically the trade-off, or the two sides of the scale that we're looking at here. Do I need the thermal retrofit before I install heating or not? And both, this is the quantitative side of it. The savings induced from building retrofits can be expressed in euros per thermal kilowatt hour or megawatt hour or whatever unit saved, and same as the cost of heat supply options can be expressed in euros per kilowatt hour supplied. And by comparing these euros per kilowatt hour saved and euros per kilowatt hour supplied, we can see which of the two options is actually more beneficial. And I'm gonna walk us through the Excel sheet. I think that makes most sense, instead of showing the slides here. And then we can have a closer look. And if you like, you can also open the tool yourself and play around with the numbers and then see how far you get. Just a second. Right. So let me get this over here. Voila. So this is the starting page. Basically, everything that I've just introduced, you can also read up on here in the instruction sheet. Let's maximize. There are some notes here about the methodology, about sources that have been used, etc. So feel free to check that out. But basically, what we start with in the tool is a database of representative buildings. Here at the top, you can pick your country or your favorite country, if you will. UK is still in here, which is nice. I wasn't aware of that. Maybe let's take France. And you can see here that the tool basically provides representative buildings for, in this case, the country of France. We have different building types. AB stands for apartment buildings. We have multifamily homes, single-family homes, terraced houses, and different construction periods. And as you can imagine, in a building that was built in 2013 or so, you probably won't be needing any additional thermal insulation in the near future. You can still calculate it here in this case and see that the costs are definitely prohibitive. But usually a typical construction period that is now undergoing, or for which now there's like a window of opportunity, is like the 70s or the 1980s. So what we would do is we would basically copy one line here and move that to the second worksheet here, which is about one individual building. So in this worksheet, we're looking at the balance, or the trade-off, if you will, between renovating the home or supplying the home through a new heating system. In both cases, we assume that these investments are taking place at the end of the life cycle of either the building facade or the heating system. They're more, in reality, things are a little more complex. You might have a remaining lifetime for the building facade, but you still might think about building retrofit. And the same goes for the heating system. As long as your heating system is still up and running, there's no need to replace it. But it in certain cases, it can make sense. But here it's a simplified situation. With we assume that the lifetime of both ends of both technologies is reached. And basically, if you are into the relatively straightforward financial math behind it, you have all the calculations here. All the bluish tables are outputs or calculation tables. Orange are inputs, so you can change inputs here. For example, you can change the lifetime of the roof component to 40 years and see how it affects the results. So all of this is dynamic. When you change a number, the calculations will change as well. Yellow tables are outputs, and that's how it goes along. So maybe we can start with the refurbishment or retrofit options. So as I've mentioned, they are expressed in euros per megawatt hour or euros per kilowatt hour, whatever you prefer. And we have the cost here for the roof, for the wall, the floors, and the windows. And we can see here that this amounts to, for usual refurbishment, so it's like a typical refurbishment, whereas an advanced refurbishment is like a deep retrofit, if you will, very state-of-the-art insulation thickness and also technologies and materials that are being used. And here they both amount to around like 70 to 80 euros per megawatt hour, so like 7 to 8 cents per kilowatt hour, if you will. And we can compare that with the cost of here in this model. We have 4 heat technologies: condensing gas boilers, biomass boilers, air source heat pumps, and ground source heat pumps. And we also have the technology data here: efficiency, operational maintenance costs, material costs, labor costs, etc. Also the lifetime. And we see already here that, for example, a biomass boiler or a new biomass boiler is almost or has a similar cost magnitude or cost range as the retrofit. But for the other technologies, we see that many of them are actually more expensive than installing or adopting the retrofit measure, which in return means that it's more cost effective to insulate first and then apply the heating system. And we can actually look at that in financial terms in this part here. So basically what you would want to do is to pick one refurbishment option. So here we pick the usual refurbishment and we take one heating technology. Let's pick the air source heat pump. We can see the investment, we see the energy saving per year. The heat supply cost in this case is 11.4 cents per kilowatt hour. So we have energy cost savings and a payback time of almost 18 years and an internal rate of return. So in this case, the investment would be profitable. I'm just trying to figure out the indicators that Somin has used here. We might want to add like an additional line for the net present value, which is just the difference between the two. But we can see already, since the internal rate of return is higher than the discount rate we applied, this is definitely a profitable investment. And in this case, it would make more sense to refurbish the home before you install a new heat pump, which would make a strong case for this energy efficiency first argument. And you can also have a look at for the gas boiler and other examples. So that's how it works. So this is basically referring to, let me just go back to one of the slides from earlier to illustrate this. This relates to the simplified indicators that we talked about here. So it's about a single investment, in this case, building renovation, but it doesn't give you the full image of energy system dynamics. As we've discussed, like in the case of heat pumps, it matters a lot where the electricity comes from, what the electricity mix is, and etc. And if you want to take this into account to some extent, there are the data sheets right here in which you're very free to alter any of the input data. For example, energy prices per country, per energy carrier. Here we also have the CO2 damage cost or emission price, as it's called here, which goes up to 320 euros per ton over time. Different technology data for the heating technologies and so on. And this part right here was only about individual heat supply in buildings, but there's also a part about district heating, which you can also play around with. Basically here you would assume a mix of different retrofit options in your region. Let's say we have 20% of the buildings that are unrenovated, and the rest is, let's make it like that. The rest is renovated with either usual or advanced retrofits. And this, as you can see on the right-hand side, affects the supply profile for district heating. And basically the logic is quite similar compared to the previous sheet. You're going to end up with a number for euros per megawatt hour, which you can then compare to the number of or the cost number for the building retrofit. Here it's about 8 cents per kilowatt hour, which when we go back to our building retrofits, the usual refurbishment would still be cost effective because it's lower in cost than the new district heating system, but this doesn't go for the advanced refurbishment. So in this particular building from the 1970s in the country of France, you wouldn't want to go below the usual refurbishment in that case. So that's basically what the CBA tool is about. So what you can do is to check first of all the logic. Then you can play around with the inputs. You can pick your favorite country up here. You can go through different construction periods and see how it affects the results. And I think you see already, even with the simplified tool, there's a lot of stuff you can do with the model. And of course, like the more complex models get, like the more variables you will have, and the more variables you would want to check on. But this is a good way to get started, I think. Any questions about our CBA tool? Did anyone already have the chance to check it out? Like to go through it, run some fantasy calculations?
I've been playing with it a bit.
All right, I remember. Yeah, very comprehensive feedback. That was cool. But just to make things clear, the limitation of this tool is that it's limited on heating systems and basically the heating sector, if you will. You can change assumptions on how the electricity mix is composed, etc. But usually you would look at this in an integrated model. And the same goes for gas. Like gas here in this model is a blend of natural gas, of biogas, of hydrogen, etc. You can change the shares of these different gases in the gas mix. But the model itself will not tell you like which is the most appropriate mix. Like this is something you can do through trial and error. But usually in energy systems modeling, there are so-called optimization approaches that do this job for you. And of course, we don't have all the complex interactions here in the energy system. Like when you have a large-scale heat pump, for example, in the district heating system, those are basically made to take advantage of the dynamic price of electricity. So they would basically produce heat when electricity prices are low and then use heat from heat storage when prices are high. So this price arbitrage is not taken into account here. We don't look at waste heat potentials in district heating. We don't look at different combinations of building elements. So in this tool, unfortunately, you cannot look at replacing only the windows or applying only insulation to the roof. We're working with predefined renovation packages here, which makes things a little simpler but less flexible. But these are just some of the limitations. But still, as I've mentioned, it's something to illustrate the principles of cost benefit analysis. And I think working with these financial indicators that we've shown before, that can already help, like having one specific application example.
Okay. All right. Yeah, maybe before we start, this tool is quite similar to the one Tim showed. I would say maybe more flexible, but less sophisticated. So the limitations are quite similar. But as my professor used to say at uni, all models are wrong, but some are useful. So hopefully you can find also this one useful for your applications. So maybe let's start from the general theoretical background of the tool. So we consider here two types of cost-benefit analysis. The original one, let's say, the more financial economic one that Tim has showed during the presentation, and the social one. So yeah, as I said, the original cost-benefit analysis takes consideration of economic impacts and how these will influence, let's say, the national economy, and takes into consideration the changes in market prices as main assumptions, whereas the addition of the social cost-benefit analysis is that it also includes environmental and social impacts, and so quantifies, let's say, these externalities that in a strictly economic model you would not consider. And we have already applied this tool for this report that we have done in collaboration with Greenpeace, which you can feel free to check by the link. Yeah, so continuing, let's say, the theoretical explanation of it, since we're using two types of cost-benefit analysis in tandem, we of course look at the results of the two different analyses at the same time. And so again, we use the net present value as the main indicator, as it's one of these financial indicators that Tim has already explained before. And essentially, we have four different situations or scenarios, as you wish to call them. And the first one is when both the financial and social analysis yield a positive net present value. This essentially means that it's both economically feasible and has social benefits, and thus you should just promote this type of innovation, policy, investment, whatever you're modeling. The second scenario is when the financial net present value is negative, but the social one is positive, essentially meaning that it is not economically beneficial. But then exactly this is why we use both, and let's say the added value of this tool, that if you were only to analyze the economic from an economics perspective, the investment, you would say, okay, we mustn't go forward with it. But once you manage to have a tool that also shows the positive social implications, you can argue that we should not cancel the investment, but provide more financial support, for example, through subsidies, increasing the municipality's equity share, etc., depending on the issue you're looking at. The third scenario is when it is economically beneficial but not socially beneficial. The first thing that maybe comes to your mind is, for example, a new gas infrastructure that economically is beneficial, but then if you look at other externalities, has negative impacts, of course. And possible next steps would be, for example, to impose penalties for investors, such as higher taxes. We see this with, for example, the carbon adjustment mechanisms, etc. And the fourth scenario is when it's neither financially nor socially beneficial. In this case, you should just stop the investment. And we follow 6 steps in our tool, which are summarized here.
Marco?
So yeah.
Just a quick question. How do you define the social NPV?
I mean, there are more slides on that. You will see how it's being calculated on the social. Basically, just to give you a brief here, social NPV is practically what Tim presented is like the standard NPV, the standard, I mean, CBA, taking into account the externalities.
Yeah,
and the model
so
benefits
we
and all
try
that.
to quantify other impacts as much as you can quantify them that are not strictly economic, to put it very simply. But we will show this in detail later in the presentation. So maybe, yeah, if there's no other questions, I'll just continue with the steps. But yeah, please speak out because I don't see you guys if you put up the hand. But yeah, so the first step is to identify the system boundaries. The second one, to identify the baseline scenario. So you choose a baseline scenario to which you will compare the other scenarios you come up with, which is exactly the third step. The fourth step is identifying and quantifying the externalities, which is what Jeremy was hinting at. Fifth step, evaluate the economic and environmental cost benefits, and finally calculate the indicators. So the first step, what this basically means is set the boundaries to either national or regional level. But again, the tool, you have to input the data. So it's not like you select on a column, as Tim was showing is that in the other model, but rather you have to put yourself the inputs inside. So depending whether you're analyzing a region or a nation, you will just put different input data. So it's very simple, this first step, let's say. The second step then will be to define the baseline scenario. And here I have put select investment on the supply side for the expansion of fossil fuels. Why? Because, well, at least in our application, the baseline scenario was investing in fossil fuel technologies, for example, natural gas, which we would consider as a baseline scenario, because then the other scenarios would be other more efficient, more renewable technologies. But if in your analysis, your baseline scenario is for some reason a renewable technology, you can of course also select this as the baseline scenario. So again, it's a very flexible tool because it really depends on the input you put. So in this case, just as an example, this is the, let's say the Excel sheet you would have, and you can just see in this case we had an available budget for fossil fuels of 4,250,000. And then it's important the performance ratio of the boiler. So in this case, we were looking at gas boilers that was of 95%. So these are usually the two things that you will have to select and input in the model. Moving on to the third step. So this is what I was mentioning, that you compare different scenarios with the baseline scenario, and you choose these scenarios. In our application, we selected 5 scenarios, which were, for example, the first one was building envelope improvement, the second heat pump installations, the third photovoltaic solar panels, fourth the combination of the first and the second, so net zero energy buildings, and the fifth scenario was just improving the building to reach a zero energy type of building and consumption and energy consumption. Then yeah, moving forwards, the first step is selecting the externalities. And yeah, so you have 4 main types of externalities. The environmental and health impacts, these are the ones that will be added in the social cost benefit analysis. The GDP impacts, multiple benefits, and also the increase in building value, economic building value that you get. So here I have put, just to show you the environmental and health impacts we considered. So essentially, depending on a different type of technology you chose, we had a different cost, so a different type of external cost defined in euros per megawatt hours. So you can see that, for example, the existing oil boiler had the highest external costs, as it is also the most polluting type of technology. But then we also consider that if you have a more efficient new type of oil boiler, the external cost will be lower, going all the way to more renewable and new technologies, for example, solar PVs, that will have the least amount of external costs. And yeah, the data was taken from the Prodessa project. Then moving on to the fifth step, here it's really quantifying the different components of the cost benefit analysis, and which can be summarized, let's say, in four main categories, which are the operational maintenance costs and benefits. And benefits, you can very easily understand them in this case as avoided costs, essentially. And these operational maintenance costs are, of course, related to the implementation of the technology. Then you have fuel costs and benefits, which are really related to the type of fuel, so more economic ones. External costs and benefits, these are the environmental and health cost of the equipment or technology you're utilizing, but also some other macroeconomic effects due to the new equipment you're installing, decreased market value of the renovated buildings, etc. And finally, just the capital costs, which is really, let's say, how much you're paying to implement this new technology. And then finally, the last step will be to calculate the different evaluation indicators. In addition to the net present value, the tool also calculates for you the internal rate of return and the benefit to cost ratio. So now I will show some examples to show you how, let's say, the application of the tool, how it results. As an example, I have taken one of the countries we analyzed in the study, which was Romania. And in the study specifically, we considered the first income decile, so let's say the poorest people in the country. And this is basically how the input that you need to find looks like. Essentially finding the different types of fuel costs, of fuels, and the different type of energy uses, how much is being used in from what technology in what use. And this, I mean, you can usually get from Eurostat. If you can't, usually household budget surveys or other type of surveys will have this type of data. And yeah, so taking, for example, this scenario 2, which was the heat pump installation, these are the results we get from the cost-benefit analysis. So as you can see, it's rather straightforward. It shows you the available budget you have inserted, the investment cost, in this case for the heat pump, the avoided cost from the new fossil fuel boiler, and the number of influenced households, and then some other data, for example, the performance ratio, the electricity price, etc. And at the end, you get the 3 indicators. So the net present value, internal rate of return, and benefit to cost ratio. And in this case, you can see that specifically for Romania and the lower income decile, the implementation of heat pumps was found to be economically not beneficial. And here also you can see the illustration of the cash flows per year. So this is integrated in the tool. That exactly shows you the initial investment costs and the fuel costs and benefits every year. And the net cash flows that you can see at the end will result in a negative investment. However, the same scenario when performing a social cost-benefit analysis, as you can see, yielded positive net present value, positive internal rate of return, and positive benefit to cost ratio. And you might ask why. In this column table, you will see that nothing really changed except that electricity price was lower by 1 cent. But the real changes were in the illustration of cash flows per year. You can see now you don't only have the fuel cost and fuel benefit, but you also have the external cost and external benefits for every year. So the tool in this case considers the other social and health benefits and costs related to the implementation of heat pump, and thus since it has a positive external benefit every year, that's why it yields at the end net present value. And finally, these are the results we got from the baseline scenario. So the baseline scenario was just investing in the gas infrastructure. And you can see that it yielded a negative cost-benefit analysis, or purely economical, but also a negative social cost-benefit analysis. And the idea is with every scenario you can first of all look at what it yields, and also at the end compare it with the baseline scenario. And this is what we did for different countries in another study, essentially showing the net cash flows of the lifetime of the technology. By the way, the reason we had 12 years here, it was because we assumed that the heat pump had a life of 12 years. But then depending on the different technology, you can also change this. So it's, let's say, a very flexible tool, less sophisticated than the one Tim showed. But it gives good insights, I think, into different perspectives. So this was it from my side.
Maybe Marco, can I jump in here 1 second just to show the people? Leave this slide on. So what you see actually, maybe you can just put it higher, right? So in essence, here is the essence of the comparison, like what we try to do with taking into account the multiple benefits and all that story when you compare different technologies. And that's, in the end of the day, what you should be able to present, whatever type of method we choose or whatever type of calculation we choose, if an investment is more beneficial on the supply or the demand side. So the gray bars on the bottom, the top left, you can see these are the, in essence, the scenario 0, which is the higher energy efficient or existing heating system. It's like investments on the existing heating system or investments on gas, in a way. The right side are all the available, the alternative technologies, meaning for building envelopes, heat pumps, whatever, ZEB and ZEB. And you can see that practically here what we get is that if you invest the same amount in gas in these countries, in expanding, let's say, the gas or whatever type of fossil network, fossil supply they used to have, it's not really so much socially beneficial rather than investing in the alternatives. And that means that warrants that from taking into account the energy efficiency first principle, you should be more orientated towards giving the same subsidy or the same funding from the operational programs there. And now for the down on the down right bar, what you also see is that this kind of a more the political angle that you have to discuss with your policymakers, because here is that if you get, for instance, one X amount of money, I don't remember now what is the amount here, and you distribute it to the same costs to households for gas or other types of investments, you can see that in several cases, for instance, the heat pump in Poland, with this amount they were going to spend, they could serve, I cannot see the number here of how many, like 250,000 households. So these are practically the recipients of the technology. And if a technology is very expensive, it means that less people will get it. Okay, because you have a standard amount to give from the operational program. A cheaper option has more recipients. So that's also the political angle that you have to persuade when getting out this investment. That goes a bit more to the, I think, to what Jean-Sebastian mentioned before on the strategic of a decision. You have to see from the policymakers as well that they need to have more people satisfied on that. So there is a balance here. It's not, you cannot just go only through the cost optimization option, which would be on the top left would be just ZEB, for instance, but very few people will get the ZEB buildings. So you have to balance it somehow also with how many people will be affected. And just if I can quickly show my screen here, it's also online, you know, the WP4, all these tools. Let me see if somebody can see it from me. Yeah, maybe you can see it from here.
You can share, yeah.
Yeah. So basically how we do the parameters you need to check. I mean, that's what we have in our SharePoint. The parameters we have, that's for natural gas. Okay, it was for the natural gas extension 1.5, okay, for one calculation we have made. These are the elements you have to just include: the number of households that will be impacted based on that, the total amount you want to share, and then these figures can be drawn from the statistics. So up to, I would say up to here, everything can be drawn from the national statistics or from the regional balances if you have. And this kind of sets up the baseline pretty easily. Now when it comes to the social cost benefit analysis, we start taking into account the multiple benefits, which is, as Marco showed from the previous study we have, which we can of course make it far better and get new data from the MICA tool and from the other tools that Tim presented, maybe also from your national NECP or draft NECP calculations if you have for the external parts, or from the primes, and adapt it. But nevertheless, you see we have values and you can come up to results. So in essence, what you need to do as coming back to the question of, I don't know who asked it from the regions, like how difficult it is. Yes, it is, of course, both exercises are difficult, what we showed. It's not like that you can do it in one way. But in the end of the day, what data you must provide outside the public ones is not so many. Okay, and it's more something that you can agree upon through some discussions, and it can be easily validated. So, I mean, that concludes also our parts. It's
if
not.
I can just add one
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
Yeah, just a tiny correction. The number of influence households is calculated actually. You mustn't input. So it's calculated by the amount of investment divided by the unitary investment cost.
Yes.
Exactly. So actually, even this you mustn't implement. You just need to find the investment cost. And another thing I want to add, since it's very flexible, this is the main thing, the main advantage, I think, because even if, let's say, you have two different policies that are not, one says, I don't know, the heat pump costs 10,000, other one says no 20, you can put both values of a heat pump and show, look, even if you, more extreme guy, think it's 20,000, actually it would still be positive.
Exactly.
So this is I think the main advantage of the tool, that you can really play with it. And it's not sophisticated. Like, of course, for example, the number of influence households. Yeah, it's just the households in the country divided by the cost of the technology. In real life, probably the influence households would be lower, but still, it's easy to play around. And the main, let's say, utility of this, as Vlastis was mentioning, is really to talk with policymakers and show them and put some numbers on the table. And then, of course, if you want to improve the model, you can improve this one, or you can take a more sophisticated one once you get more in detail. But this serves, let's say, as this really to show the situation and the potential of different technologies, essentially.